Indestructible, protection, flying, reach, menace, trample, death touch, mill, scry. There are so many words on magic cards, and unfortunately, not all of them will have rules text explaining the interactions. In the previous video in the series, I explained what a card looks like, as well as the card types and how a turn is structured. In this video, we're going to start getting into some of the many exceptions to the rules of Magic. See, pretty much every rule I explained in the previous video has a number of cards that will change or interact differently with those same rules. Mortals, immortals, and friends from the blind eternities, my name is Samson Loreseeker, and today in my classroom, you will begin to learn the wonderful world of keywords and what they mean. To start off, a keyword is essentially magic card shorthand. See, if every ability a creature had was spelled out word for word every time, magic cards would begin to look a lot like, well, Yu-Gi-Oh cards. So Wizards of the Coast began to use things called keywords to shorten the text that would be applied to cards. This has also resulted in many cards having more abilities in the modern day, for better or for worse. There are two main types of keywords, evergreen and deciduous keywords. Much like the leaves of the trees that bear the same titles, evergreen keywords are regularly seen all the time, while deciduous keywords are around occasionally but disappear and reappear. For instance, every set since Alpha has seen a card with flying, making it evergreen, but mutate will only be found in the set Ikoria. As this series is supposed to teach new players, trying to explain every single keyword in the game would be way outside of the scope, as you will likely not see many of those keywords all that often in your time playing. Plus, there are far too many for a single video, and this one's already long enough as it is. As a result, we will only be looking at evergreen keywords today, as no matter what set gets you interested in learning magic, these words will show up. With that forward out of the way, let's dig in, shall we? There are a number of keywords on cards that are not exactly abilities. Rather, they are actions a player can take or must take in certain circumstances. There are 18 current evergreen keywords in this category, and we will discuss them all alphabetically. Activate is the first keyword action in the list. Activated abilities are, as they say, abilities that need to be activated, rather than just happening like a triggered ability, or always being in play like a passive or static ability. Activating an activated ability means to put the ability onto the stack and pay its costs so that it will resolve. You can now see why these get shortened to keywords. Attach is the next keyword ability, and it is also pretty self-explanatory. It means to move an aura, equipment, or fortification onto another object or player. Auras, equipments, and fortifications are certain subtypes of enchantments and artifacts that can be connected to certain targets. Attaching is just shorthand for the process of doing that. Cast is the next, and we discussed it during the previous video. Much like Activate, it means to take a spell and put it onto the stack and pay its cost. Important to note, there are some spells that have an ability that gets put onto the stack when it is cast, and that will be separate to the spell. It will also resolve before the spell does. There are a few things that have effects like that, so keep an eye out for that wording. Counter is another important word in this game. To counter something is to cancel a spell or ability so that it won't resolve and its effects won't happen. If you're countering a spell, the spell will go straight to the graveyard and will have no effect, while countering an ability will remove it from the stack, and whatever the ability was won't happen. These spells and effects that counter things are an integral part of the game, and the source of frustration for many players. Create refers to the act of putting a token onto the battlefield. A token is a permanent, usually with no mana cost, that is put onto the battlefield by the effect of a card. Something that is very important is that, even though tokens have types, subtypes, and even in some cases supertypes, a token is not a card. If they go to any zone other than the battlefield, abilities will see them go there, and then the token ceases to exist. Otherwise, tokens function exactly the same as whatever permanent type they are imitating. Destroy is another quite simple one. When something is destroyed, it goes from the battlefield to its owner's graveyard. Destruction happens due to either the keyword or due to damage. If something has its toughness reduced to 0, or is sacrificed, another word we will get to, it does not count as being destroyed. The broader term dies covers those options as well as destruction. Many effects trigger off of dies or dying, but few to none trigger off of destruction specifically. The term discard we covered in the previous video when we discussed the cleanup step. To discard something is to take a card from your hand and put it directly into your graveyard. There are some abilities that care about being discarded, and some that require you to discard as a cost, but for the most part, there will be no effects from the card when you discard it. Exchange is a moderately strange one. Simply put, it's a trade. Most commonly, it is an exchange of permanents, control of two things being swapped. On occasion, it can be something like a life total that gets exchanged, and in rare cases, spells on the stack or even every card in a certain zone. Don't worry about those though, they're not something to be concerned about. Both targets of an exchange do need to be viable targets though, and one half of the exchange disappearing will usually result in the exchange not happening. Exile is another one of the most important keywords to know. When something is exiled, it is put into the exile zone, that kind of second graveyard thing I talked about in the last video. This can either be permanent or temporary depending on the spell or ability that caused it. As the quote-unquote graveyard for the graveyard, it is a more permanent method of removal for many things. Important to note that, if for instance a creature is exiled, it does not die, and as a result, anything that cares about death or preventing death will not be able to do anything about it. Fight is the next action word. This action means two creatures deal damage to each other equal to their power. It functions essentially the same way as dealing combat damage to each other, but it is importantly not actual combat damage. The powers are compared to the toughnesses, and if any creature in the fight takes damage equal to or greater than its toughness, that creature is destroyed. The term mill will typically also have some quantitative number connected to it, such as mill a card or mill 2 cards, etc. To mill, you simply take the top X cards of your library, where X is the number stipulated, and put it directly into your graveyard. This was a player-coined term for the longest time, originating with the card Millstone, until Core Set 2021, when Wizards made it into an official keyword. It actually was so prevalent that the term became used in other games outside of Magic as well. The term play was mentioned in the last video a little bit, as what you do with lands rather than casting. However, to play can also mean to cast in the case of certain spells. Seeing the words play a card on a spell can mean playing a land or casting a spell, but cast a spell will never include playing a land. It's kind of like one of those Venn diagrams where one circle is completely inside the second. Revealing is when you start getting into the information game side of Magic. See, you won't know what's in your opponent's hand, or in and on top of their library, and they won't know yours. However, when something is revealed by this ability, it becomes what is known as public knowledge. Revealing someone's hand or revealing the top card of a library are very common, allowing all players in the game to see the designated cards that were revealed, sometimes allowing you to plan around what your opponent has going on. Many cards that find something in your library will also ask you to reveal the card you find, as a way to ensure that you're not cheating. Sacrifice, or as players more often shorten it to, sacking, means to take a permanent you control and put it into the graveyard. If it is a creature, this counts as dying but not being destroyed. This allows it to get around certain abilities that protect a permanent from being destroyed. Some decks want to make other people sacrifice things, while some decks want to sacrifice their own things. Another important note is that in just about every case, the player being targeted gets to choose what they sacrifice, not necessarily the player causing them to sacrifice. The scry or scrying mechanic will, like mill, have a number connected to it. To scry is to look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the indicated number. You may then take any number of those cards that you look at, and choose to either leave them on top of the library, or move them to the bottom of the library instead. If you look at more than one card, you also get to choose exactly how those cards will be arranged when you put them back. This is a very powerful ability, allowing you to sculpt what you are about to draw to be favorable for you. There is a similar keyword, surveil, which is not yet evergreen like scry is, but I'll mention it here since it's only a matter of time before it is. Surveil is almost exactly the same as scrying, but instead of moving cards to the bottom of the library, they go to the graveyard instead. To search is another very straightforward keyword. Searching is when you look for a card in a specific zone. A lot of people often refer to this as quote-unquote tutoring, thanks to the prevalence of cards like Demonic Tutor, Mystical Tutor, Worldly Tutor, and others that all have you search your library for a card. Shuffle, likewise, is self-explanatory. Anybody who has played with a deck of cards in any way knows about shuffling. I don't really need to explain this one, but if I didn't mention it, it would bother me. The last action keywords are the joint tap and untap actions that I discussed in the first video in the series. To tap a permanent, turn it 90 degrees from an upright position. Once something is tapped, it cannot tap again until it is untapped. Again, this is to draw mana from lands, as well as pay costs for abilities, or to declare a creature as an attacker during the combat phase. That sure was a lot, but unfortunately we aren't quite done with all of the Evergreen Keywords yet. There are still the ability Evergreen Keywords to go over. However, remember what I said at the end of the previous video. Never forget to ask for help if you need clarification about an ability, wording, or interaction. This game is complicated, and getting help is not a weakness. Now, on to the ability keywords. Ability keywords are abilities found on permanents that are almost all static or passive abilities, with two exceptions. A vast majority of these keyworded abilities involve combat in some way, and are usually found on creatures for the most part because of it. As these are so prevalent across all sets of Magic, they usually will not have reminder text on the card explaining what the ability does. Hence, this video. Starting at the top alphabetically, we have Death Touch. The short explanation is that any amount of damage a source with Death Touch deals to a creature would destroy it. While this is usually important during combat, it's not exclusive to combat damage. Things like the aforementioned Fight keyword will also utilize Death Touch, and if the source is given the ability to deal non-combat damage for another reason, it will also kill any creature it damages. Next up is the ability Defender, which simply means that the creature cannot attack. The keyword has been retroactively given to all creatures with the subtype Wall, as previously it was just a rule that all walls could not attack. However, they keyworded it in order to allow the ability to be given to non-wall creatures too. The next ability I'm going to have to talk about with its partner, skipping ahead a little alphabetically. First Strike and Double Strike. These two abilities change how the combat phase operates by adding a sixth step into the mix. Now, after attackers and blockers have been declared, there's a new combat damage step, in which only creatures with First and Double Strike deal damage. Then, after you leave that step, there is the original combat damage step in which all creatures without First Strike deal regular combat damage. If a creature has Double Strike, it deals damage during both combat damage steps. This means that if a creature with First Strike is blocked by a creature without it, and the creature without First Strike is dealt lethal damage in the First Strike damage step, it will move to the graveyard before it even has the chance to damage the creature that has First Strike. This also means that First Strike creatures love having Death Touch. Unlike Death Touch, First Strike does not come into play during fights. The Enchant and Equip abilities are applied to auras and equipment, like how the action keyword Attach applied to them. The Enchant keyword merely tells you what an aura can legally target. For instance, Enchant Creature or Enchant Land. Meanwhile, unlike all other static keyword abilities, Equip is an activated ability, where you pay the cost listed next to the ability, and once you do, you attach that equipment to a legal target. This can only be done at sorcery speed, unless stated otherwise. When an enchanted creature leaves play, the aura goes to the graveyard, unless stated otherwise. When an equipped creature leaves play, the equipment remains on the battlefield and can be equipped again. Flash is the next keyword, and it's arguably the most simple. A spell with Flash can be cast at any time one could cast an instant. This allows for a great deal of flexibility, as a spell with Flash can be cast on an opponent's turn, during combat as a surprise, or in response to something being put on the stack, breaking the normal timing rules for casting a permanent spell. A very simple mechanic, but incredibly useful. Flying is the first of the quote-unquote evasion keywords, as they are known, due to making it harder for your opponent to block them. A creature with flying can only be blocked by another creature with flying, or a creature with the reach ability. It's been in every set since the beginning and is one of the most prevalent and important of the ability keywords. Flying creatures can also block creatures that are quote-unquote on the ground just fine as well. Haste is another simple keyword. It means that the creature with haste can attack or activate a tap ability the turn it was summoned, which is usually not the case due to summoning sickness, as mentioned in the last video. Activated abilities that do not require tapping are unaffected by the summoning sickness. Next, I would like to cover the three main protection keywords: Indestructible, Hexproof, and Ward. Hexproof is the simplest, and it means that whatever has hexproof cannot be targeted by spells or abilities your opponents control. Over time, Wizards of the Coast realized that that is a very strong ability, and developed Ward. Unlike the static hexproof, Ward is actually a triggered ability, which triggers when the permanent with Ward is being targeted by a spell or ability an opponent controls. Upon being targeted, the ability triggers, and that opponent must pay whatever the ward cost is. If they do not pay the cost, the ability or spell will be countered. If they do pay the cost, the spell or ability will resolve. This was in an attempt to make a more fair version of hexproof, to varying degrees of success. Indestructible, the third ability in the trifecta, means that the permanent cannot be destroyed through spells or effects. As mentioned when talking about destruction, dying, sacrifice, and exile, a wild string of words to say in a row, this doesn't make the permanent unkillable, just very hard to remove. Effects that do damage or destroy a thing won't remove something with indestructible, but decreasing its toughness, making its controller sacrifice it, or exiling it outright will remove something with indestructible. Lifelink is a mechanic that allows a player to regain life. Whenever a source with lifelink deals damage, its controller, or owner if it doesn't have a controller, gains life points equal to the damage dealt. This is not an ability that goes on the stack. The life gain is applied at the same time damage is dealt. This means that, if you have a 3-power creature with lifelink, you are at 3 life, an opponent attacks with 2 3-power creatures, and you block one with a lifelink creature, you will survive. This is because, even as you are dealt 3 damage from the unblocked creature, you are gaining 3 life from the lifelink, meaning that you will remain at 3 life. This, like Death Touch, also applies to non-combat damage. If a creature with lifelink fights something, you will gain life equal to its power. The next is another simple evasion keyword, Menace. A creature with Menace cannot be blocked unless 2 or more creatures are assigned to block it. If the defending player only has 1 creature, they're not able to block a creature with Menace. Simple and clean. Reach is another incredibly simple one, and was mentioned with flying since the only thing that Reach does is allow the creature to block creatures with flying. Since it doesn't have flying itself, it can still be blocked on the ground like a normal creature. Always check your opponent's creatures for Reach before attacking them with a flyer, or you will be in for quite the surprise. Some things with the ability may not look like they'd be able to. Trample is a lot more complex as it changes how damage is dealt. Whenever a creature with Trample is blocked, any excess damage it would deal beyond the lethal amount is then instead dealt to the player, planeswalker, or battle they were attacking. I've used very specific wording there for a reason, and I will now explain some of the strange edge cases that can come up with Trample. First, if a creature with Trample is blocked, and the creature blocking it is destroyed, the amount of lethal damage needed now is 0. So all of the Trampler's normal damage would, quote-unquote, trample over to the defended player or object. If multiple creatures block the creature with Trample, lethal damage must be dealt to each one before the rest tramples over. If the blocking creature has Indestructible, you assign what would be lethal damage to it, then trample over with the rest, even though the Indestructible creature is not dead. If the blocking creature is dealt damage before combat damage, the amount needed to assign to make it lethal changes, and the Trampler will then trample over with the rest. Finally, when combining Death Touch and Trample, the lethal damage to kill any creature regardless of toughness is 1, so 1 damage will be dealt and the rest will trample over. Trample really is the inverse of so many of these keywords, where it seems incredibly simple, but in actuality it's a lot more complicated than expected. Finally, there's Vigilance, which, unlike Trample, is refreshingly simple. A creature with Vigilance does not tap when it attacks, allowing it to also block. How refreshing after the last one. And that is it for the current Evergreen Keywords. But before we wrap up, there are 2 keywords I want to talk about, since they were Evergreen Keywords for quite a while before they started getting phased out. Despite this, they still show up on certain cards quite often, so you should be made aware of them. These are Shroud and Protection. Shroud is simple enough. It's like Hexproof, but you are also not allowed to target the thing with Shroud, with spells and abilities. Protection, on the other hand, is a bit more complex. Protection is always followed by a description of what something is protected from, which is usually a color, but can be people, spell types, or even numbers. As the name implies, something with protection is quote-unquote protected from that thing, though what that entails is a little complex. The acronym DET can be used to remember it. The D stands for damage. All damage that would be dealt to the protected thing by the specified thing is prevented. The E stands for enchanted or equipped. So the thing cannot be enchanted by auras that match the quality, or equipped by equipment that do. The B is for blocked. The thing cannot be blocked by creatures that match the specified quality. And T stands for targeted. It cannot be targeted by spells or abilities from sources that match the given quality. This effect is symmetrical, which means that if you have any sources that match what the thing is protected from, you cannot target it yourself. While protection has been downgraded to deciduous, it still shows up surprisingly often, and can be very, very confusing to those who have never had to interact with it. Remember, det. No damage, equips, enchants, blocks, or targets from the source that matches. And there we have it. All 35 evergreen keywords you can expect to see in every set going forward, plus a few little extra credit keywords you can expect to see, especially if you are eyeing up Commander as a format you would like to play. Again, this video was a lot of information, but it will be relevant no matter which set you will start learning to play in, and I cannot stress it enough in this series, do not be afraid to ask for help. As I keep saying, this game is complicated, and there is no shame in asking another player for clarifications on how mechanics work. Sometimes even experts need a refresher on how things interact. But as you play, and you encounter these words more and more, they will become quite familiar to you. Thank you so much for watching. This is the second installment in my classroom series, where I attempt to explain magic to new players. I've been really enjoying making these, and I hope they continue to be helpful. If you enjoyed and would like to see more, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. And until next time, please take care of yourselves, everybody.